I thought I was buying scrap metal for $15,000, but hidden behind a false wall in the engine room of an abandoned cruise ship, I found something that would make me $75 million richer and put my life in serious danger. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. My name is Zara Chen, and I'm about to tell you the most incredible story of my life. It started with desperation and ended with me becoming one of the youngest treasure hunters in maritime history. But let me warn you right now, this discovery almost cost me everything, including my life. I'm a 28-year-old marine mechanic from Portland, Oregon. Most people see me as just another grease-covered woman working in a male-dominated field, but I've always been different. While other kids played with dolls, I was taking apart boat engines with my grandfather Bruno in his tiny repair shop down at the marina. Bruno wasn't just my grandpa, he was my best friend, my mentor, and the only person who truly understood my obsession with anything that floats. When Bruno passed away 2 years ago from cancer, he left me his marine repair business. It wasn't much, just a rundown shop with outdated equipment and a handful of loyal customers, but it was our legacy. Bruno used to tell me stories about the old days when he worked on luxury yachts and military vessels, always ending with the same advice. Zara, the ocean keeps secrets. Sometimes those secrets are worth more than gold. I never really understood what he meant until that cold October morning when I stood on the deck of the SS Meridian, a massive abandoned cruise ship that would change my life forever. The ship was a monster, over 800 feet long, sitting in Seattle's industrial harbor like a floating ghost town, paint peeling, windows broken, rust streaking down her sides like tears. Everyone at the salvage auction thought I was crazy for bidding on her. The other salvagers took one look at this deteriorating giant and walked away, shaking their heads. They saw a money pit. I saw possibility. Maybe it was Bruno's voice in my head, or maybe it was pure desperation, but something told me this ship was special. Standing there with the autumn wind cutting through my jacket, holding the auction papers that proved I now owned this massive piece of maritime history, I had no idea I was about to become the center of the biggest treasure discovery the Pacific Northwest had seen in decades. I thought I was saving my grandfather's dying business with a calculated risk on scrap metal. I was wrong about everything except the risk part. The moment I stepped aboard the SS Meridian for the first time, I knew my life would never be the same. The ship felt alive somehow, like it was keeping secrets in every shadow. The main deck stretched out before me like an abandoned city, with empty pools, scattered deck chairs, and doorways leading into darkness. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my flashlight, not from fear, but from anticipation. Bruno always said that the best treasures are hidden where people stop looking. As I walked deeper into the ship's belly, past passenger cabins filled with debris and down staircases that groaned under my weight, I started to understand what he meant. But first, let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment when everything started falling apart and this crazy adventure became my only hope. Let me paint you a picture of just how desperate things had gotten before the SS Meridian entered my life. For 2 years after Bruno's funeral, I'd been working 16-hour days trying to keep his marine repair shop alive. Every morning I'd unlock the rusty gates of Chen Marine Services, flip on the fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry wasps, and pray that today would be the day a real customer walked through the door. The shop sat on a narrow strip of waterfront property that Bruno had bought in 1987, when Portland's Marina District was still affordable. Now it was surrounded by trendy restaurants and luxury condos, making our little operation look like a relic from another era. Inside, the smell of motor oil and salt air mixed with the musty odor of old wood. Bruno's tools still hung exactly where he'd left them, organized with the precision of someone who understood that every wrench and socket had its place. My specialty was vintage boat restoration, something Bruno had taught me from the time I could hold a screwdriver. We worked on classic wooden sailboats, restored World War II patrol boats, and brought forgotten yachts back to their former glory. It was beautiful work, the kind that fed your soul, but it barely fed my bank account. The problem was simple. There just weren't enough people willing to pay what proper restoration work was worth. My younger brother Finn called me every few days, always starting the conversation the same way. Z, how are the books looking? Finn was 24, worked in tech, and made more money in a month than I saw in 6. He meant well, but every conversation felt like a gentle interrogation about my financial stability. He'd inherited Bruno's practical side while I got his stubborn streak and love for impossible projects. My mother Delora was even more direct. She'd stopped by the shop 3 weeks before the auction, wearing her real estate blazer and carrying a folder of job listings. "Honey, I found some excellent opportunities at marine insurance companies," she'd said, setting the papers on my workbench. "You'd use all your boat knowledge, but with a steady paycheck and benefits." I'd stared at those listings for a long time after she left. Office jobs, cubicles, meetings about liability assessments instead of working with my hands to bring dead engines back to life. It felt like betraying everything Bruno had taught me about following your passion, but the numbers didn't lie. I had maybe 3 months of operating expenses left in the bank. That's when my childhood best friend Ren suggested I check out the Seattle Marine Salvage Auction. Ren had grown up in the Marina District too, daughter of a charter boat captain, and she understood the business better than most. "Sometimes you can find good deals on parts," she'd said. "Maybe some equipment you could resell." The auction was held at a massive industrial pier in Seattle's Harbor District. Dozens of boats, engines, and maritime equipment spread out under gray October skies. I'd driven up in Bruno's old pickup truck with $15,000 worth of cashier's checks in my jacket pocket. It was literally every dollar I could access without destroying my ability to pay rent and utilities. Most of the serious bidders were commercial salvage operators, men in Carhartt jackets who knew exactly what everything was worth down to the penny. They moved through the lots like sharks, calculating scrap metal prices and resale values with practiced eyes. I felt completely out of my league. Then I saw her. The SS Meridian sat at the far end of the pier like a sleeping giant. 830 feet of deteriorating luxury, built in 1983 for Caribbean cruises and abandoned since 2009 when the cruise line went bankrupt. The auctioneer barely spent 2 minutes describing her. Lot 47, the vessel Meridian, being sold as is for scrap metal recovery. Buyer responsible for all towing and environmental compliance. Starting bid $15,000. Most of the crowd didn't even look up from their clipboards. A few people wandered over to examine her hull, took some photos, and walked away shaking their heads. I heard one guy tell his partner, "She's been sitting too long, more rust than steel," at this point. But standing there looking at that massive ship, I heard Bruno's voice as clear as if he was standing next to me. "The ocean keeps secrets, Zara. Sometimes those secrets are worth more than gold." My phone rang as I stared up at the ship's towering superstructure. "Z, please tell me you're just looking at boat parts and not planning anything crazy," Finn said. "I'm at a salvage auction," I replied, not taking my eyes off the Meridian. "There's this cruise ship here. Please tell me you didn't just spend our last 15 grand on a floating cemetery." I looked around at all the professional salvagers walking away from the Meridian, at the auctioneer preparing to move on to the next lot, at the opportunity that everyone else was too smart to take. "Trust me, little brother. Grandpa Bruno always said these old ships have secrets worth finding." The auctioneer called for bids. My hand went up before my brain could stop it. The moment I stepped aboard the SS Meridian 3 days after winning the auction, I knew I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. The ship that had looked impressive from the pier revealed herself to be a floating disaster up close. My boots crunched through broken glass as I walked across what used to be the main deck. Pool areas were filled with stagnant rainwater and debris. The elegant dining rooms I'd imagined restoring were stripped bare, with holes punched through walls where previous salvagers had ripped out anything valuable. I spent that first day with a clipboard and calculator, trying to convince myself this could still work. The ship's original capacity was 2,400 passengers, which meant miles of copper wiring, tons of brass fixtures, and aluminum superstructure that should have been worth good money. But as I explored deeper into the ship, reality hit me like a cold wave. Previous salvage teams had already taken the easy stuff. All the copper piping was gone. The brass propellers had been removed. Even the aluminum railings had been stripped from most decks. What remained was mostly steel structure so corroded by salt air that it would barely qualify as scrap metal. After 3 days of inventory, I had identified maybe $2,000 worth of salvageable material. The math was brutal. Towing. The ship to a scrapyard would cost $8,000. Environmental cleanup and disposal fees would run another $4,000. The daily mooring fees at Seattle Harbor were bleeding me at $200 per day. I was looking at a net loss of over $10,000, money I absolutely did not have. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Finn called every morning with the same question. Any luck finding something valuable? I could hear the worry in his voice getting stronger each day. By day 4, he'd moved past worry into panic mode. Z, I've been running the numbers, he said during one particularly painful conversation. Even if you find exactly what you're hoping for, you're still looking at a loss. Maybe it's time to cut bait before this gets worse. Delora was less subtle. She showed up at the ship on day 5 with a thermos of coffee and a folder of bankruptcy attorney recommendations. We sat in what used to be the ship's main lobby, surrounded by water stains and the smell of decay. Honey, your grandfather was a wonderful man, but he never had to make the kind of business decisions you're facing now, she said, stirring sugar into her coffee with a plastic spoon. Sometimes admitting defeat is the smart choice. Even Wren, my most loyal supporter, was starting to crack. She'd driven up from Portland to help me search, but after spending 2 days crawling through rusty corridors and finding nothing but broken furniture and mold, her optimism was fading fast. Maybe it's time to cut your losses, Z, she said on our 6th day aboard. This ship is bleeding you dry. You've got maybe a week before the mooring fees alone put you in serious debt. But I couldn't give up. Every night, I'd sit in Bruno's old pickup truck in the harbor parking lot, staring up at the Meridian's dark silhouette against the Seattle skyline. I kept hearing his voice from all those afternoons in the shop. Zara, most people look at broken things and see problems. We look at broken things and see possibilities. On day 7, something changed. I was down in the engine room taking measurements of the main drive shaft for potential scrap value when I noticed something odd. The ship's original blueprints, which I'd downloaded from maritime archives, showed the engine room extending another 20 feet toward the stern. But standing there with my measuring tape, the room ended with a steel wall that looked newer than everything around it. The wall was painted the same industrial gray as the rest of the engine room, but the paint was cleaner, less faded. More importantly, the riveting pattern was different. The original construction used overlapping steel plates with rivets every 6 inches. This wall used welded seams with rivets every 12 inches, a technique that became standard in the 1990s, not the 1980s when the ship was built. I ran my hands along the wall's surface, feeling for any irregularities. About 4 feet from the floor, my fingers found a seam that had been carefully concealed but not perfectly. Someone had cut through the original wall and installed this barrier, then painted over everything to hide their work. "Wren, come look at this," I called out. She appeared at my shoulder, holding her flashlight. "What am I looking at?" "This wall. Doesn't belong here. Look at the blueprints." I spread the architectural drawings across a clean section of floor. According to the original construction plans, this space should extend another 20 feet. Someone sealed it off. Wren studied the drawings, then looked at the wall, then back at the drawings. Why would someone do that? That question kept me awake for the next 3 nights. Why seal off part of an engine room? What could be back there that someone wanted hidden? The possibilities ranged from mundane to extraordinary. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to find out by staring at the wall. "Something's not right here," I told Wren as we prepared to leave that evening. "Why would someone seal off part of the engine room? What were they hiding?" She was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Z, you know what you're thinking about doing is crazy, right? Cutting through a wall based on nothing but a hunch?" I looked back at that mysterious barrier one more time before we headed up to the main deck. Maybe it's time for a little crazy. I made the decision that would change everything while sitting in a 24-hour diner at 3 in the morning, staring at blueprints spread across a sticky table. The waitress had refilled my coffee cup 6 times, and I'd been running calculations on napkins for hours. The math was simple and brutal. I had exactly 4 days before my credit cards maxed out, and I'd have to abandon the ship. But that wall haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see those mismatched rivets, that slightly different paint color, the way the space just ended where it shouldn't. Bruno used to say that when something doesn't make sense, it usually means you're missing important information. The question was whether I was brave enough or stupid enough to find out what that information was. The next morning, I called Ren at 7 a.m. "I need your help with something, and you're probably going to think I've lost my mind." "More than I already do," she said, but I could hear her getting interested despite herself. "What are you planning?" "I want to cut through that wall." There was a long silence. Then, "Zara, that's a load-bearing wall in the engine room of a ship. What if you compromise the structural integrity? What if there's nothing back there but more rust and disappointment? What if there's something amazing back there that someone wanted to keep hidden?" Another silence. "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious. I've got my acetylene torch in the truck, and I've studied the blueprints enough to know where I can cut safely. But I need someone watching my back in case something goes wrong." Ren sighed, the kind of deep sigh that means your best friend is about to do something crazy, and you're going to help them anyway. "Fine, but we do this smart. Safety gear, proper ventilation, and we stop the second anything looks dangerous." We met at the ship that afternoon with enough equipment to run a small welding operation. I'd brought Bruno's professional acetylene torch setup, the same one he'd used for 30 years of marine repairs. Ren showed up with industrial respirators, emergency fire extinguishers, and a first aid kit that looked like it could handle a small war. Standing in front of that wall with the torch in my hands, I felt the weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't just about cutting through steel. This was about betting everything I had left on a hunch that might be completely wrong. If there was nothing behind this wall, I'd have destroyed any remaining value the ship might have had, while wasting my last few $100s on mooring fees. "Last chance to back out," Ren said, adjusting her respirator. We could still walk away and pretend this never happened. I thought about Bruno, about all the stories he'd told me about ships and secrets and the importance of following your instincts even when everyone thinks you're crazy. He always said the best discoveries come from looking where other people are afraid to look. The torch ignited with a familiar blue flame that reminded me of countless hours in Bruno's shop. The first cut was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Sparks flew in brilliant orange arcs, and the smell of burning metal filled the air. But as the blade bit into the steel, I realized this wall was much thicker than it should have been for a simple partition. "This isn't just a wall," I called out to Ren over the noise of the torch. "It's reinforced. Look at this thickness." 3 inches of solid steel, not the half-inch partition that should have been there according to building standards. Someone had installed this barrier to keep people out, not just to divide space. My hands were shaking with excitement as I continued cutting. After 2 hours of careful work, we'd cut a rectangular opening large enough to crawl through. I shut off the torch and grabbed my flashlight, heart pounding as I approached the hole we'd created. The beam of light penetrated about 6 feet before hitting something that made me gasp. Metal containers, dozens of them, stacked from floor to ceiling in a space the size of a small room. "Ren, you need to see this." She squeezed through the opening beside me, her own flashlight adding to the illumination. The containers were military-grade, waterproof, and marked with shipping codes and dates from the 1990s. Each one was carefully secured with heavy-duty locks and labeled with numbers in what looked like a cataloging system. "What do you think is in them?" Ren whispered, as if speaking too loudly might make them disappear. I approached the nearest container and wiped away a layer of dust from its surface. Beneath the grime, I could make out additional markings. Property of Cornelius Blackwood Private Collection and authenticated 1994. But it was what I found wedged behind the largest container that made my knees go weak. A ship's logbook wrapped in waterproof canvas and tied with rope. The cover was embossed with SS Meridian, Captain's Private Log, and dated from 1994 to 1995. My hands trembled as I opened the first page and read the handwritten entry. 15th of March 1994. Have successfully secured the Blackwood collection in sealed compartment. Political situation deteriorating rapidly. Mr. Blackwood insists the artifacts must be protected at all costs until safe transport can be arranged. Wren, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I think we just found something that's been missing for 30 years. She moved closer, reading over my shoulder. Is that a real Van Gogh? She asked, pointing to a photograph tucked between the pages of the logbook. I stared at the image, then at the containers, then at the logbook again. According to this, everything here was legally purchased but had to be hidden during political upheaval. The owner died in 1995, and the captain never came back. Standing in that hidden room surrounded by decades-old mysteries, I realized that Bruno had been right all along. The ocean really did keep secrets, and some of those secrets were worth more than gold. Opening the first container changed everything I thought I knew about my life, my future, and what it means to take a calculated risk. My hands were shaking as I cut through the heavy-duty lock with my angle grinder. The container lid lifted, with a pneumatic hiss that told me the seal had held perfectly for 30 years. Inside, wrapped in museum-quality preservation materials, was a painting that took my breath away. The brushstrokes were unmistakable, the colors still vibrant despite 3 decades in darkness. I'd seen this exact piece in art history books during my community college days. It was a Van Gogh self-portrait that had been reported missing from a private collection in Eastern Europe in 1994. Wren, we need to be very careful about what we do next, I said, gently closing the container. If this is real, we're looking at something worth millions of dollars. But Wren was already opening another container, her eyes wide with disbelief. Zara, look at this. She held up a small sculpture that gleamed even in the dim light of our flashlights. The authentication papers say it's a Rodin bronze, dated 1889. Over the next 2 hours, we cataloged the contents of 12 containers. Renaissance paintings, ancient Roman coins, medieval manuscripts, jewelry that belonged to European royalty, and artifacts that I recognized from museum documentaries. Each piece came with detailed provenance documentation, authentication certificates, and insurance appraisals from the early 1990s. The logbook told the complete story. Cornelius Blackwood had been a wealthy American industrialist who spent 40 years building one of the world's most impressive private art collections. When political upheaval threatened his holdings in Eastern Europe, he arranged to transport everything to safety aboard the SS Meridian during one of her Mediterranean cruises. The plan was to hide the collection temporarily, then transfer it to a secure facility in Switzerland. But Blackwood died of a heart attack in 1995, just 6 months after the collection was hidden. Captain Hayes, the only other person who knew the location, was killed in a car accident in 1996. The collection had been waiting in that sealed room ever since, completely forgotten by the outside world. I knew I was in over my head, so I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of trying to handle this discovery alone, I contacted Vaughn Sterling, a maritime art appraiser Bruno had worked with years ago during a yacht restoration project. Vaughn specialized in recovered artwork and had connections throughout the international art world. When Vaughn arrived at the ship 3 days later, he spent 6 hours examining pieces with a jeweler's loupe and portable X-ray equipment. His assessment was both thrilling and terrifying. "Young lady, you've just made the most significant maritime treasure discovery in decades," he said, carefully rewrapping a Monet water lily painting. "Based on current market values and the exceptional condition of these pieces, you're looking at approximately $75 million in authenticated artwork and artifacts." The number hit me like a physical blow. $75 million. I'd gone from facing bankruptcy to becoming one of the wealthiest people in Oregon in the span of a week. But Vaughn's next words brought me crashing back to reality. "But this kind of money brings dangerous people out of the shadows. Word has a way of getting out. And there are individuals who would rather steal this collection than buy it legally. He was right to be worried. Somehow, despite our attempts at secrecy, news of the discovery had leaked. It started with strange phone calls to my hotel room, people claiming to represent interested collectors who wanted to make immediate cash offers. Then I noticed the same car following me from the ship to my hotel 3 nights in a row. The breaking point came when someone broke into the ship while I was having dinner with Vaughn in downtown Seattle. They'd cut through the same wall we'd repaired, but they hadn't found the exact location of the hidden room. Still, it was clear that my secret was out and my life was potentially in danger. All I wanted was enough scrap metal to save my grandfather's shop, I told Vaughn as we sat in his hotel room discussing security options. Now I'm looking over my shoulder every 5 minutes. That's when Vaughn introduced me to Iris Blackwood, a maritime lawyer who specialized in salvage rights and happened to be Cornelius Blackwood's great niece. The irony wasn't lost on any of us that I'd found her great-uncle's lost collection. Under maritime salvage law, you have legitimate claim to anything found on property you legally own, Iris explained during our first meeting. But we need to move quickly and carefully. There are proper procedures for claiming recovered artwork, and we need to establish your legal ownership before word spreads further. Working with Iris and Vaughn, we developed a plan to secure the collection and establish my legal rights while keeping me safe from treasure hunters and criminals. The next few weeks would determine whether this incredible discovery would transform my life or destroy it. Standing on the deck of the SS Meridian that night, looking out at Seattle's glittering skyline, I thought about Bruno and his belief that the ocean keeps secrets worth finding. He'd been right, but he'd never warned me that some secrets come with a price that goes far beyond money. 6 months after discovering the Blackwood collection, I'm standing in the completely renovated Chen Marine Services, watching my team of 12 skilled craftsmen restore a 1947 Chris Craft yacht to museum quality. The sounds of precision work fill the air, sanders humming, varnish brushes whispering across gleaming wood, and the satisfied voices of people who love what they do for a living. The legal process was more complex than I'd ever imagined, but Iris Blackwood proved to be worth every penny I paid her. Working through maritime courts, we established my salvage rights under international law while simultaneously ensuring that every piece in the collection had clear, legitimate provenance. The authentication process took 4 months and involved experts from 3 different countries, but every single piece checked out as legally acquired by Cornelius Blackwood decades earlier. The decision of what to do with $75 million worth of art and artifacts wasn't as simple as I'd expected. Vaughn suggested I donate several key pieces to major museums in exchange for substantial tax benefits and positive publicity that would protect me from future treasure hunters. It was brilliant advice that served multiple purposes. The Van Gogh self-portrait now hangs in the Portland Art Museum with a plaque that reads, "On loan from the Blackwood Chen Maritime Heritage Foundation." The Rodin bronze sits in the Seattle Art Museum, and the medieval manuscripts found a home at the University of Washington's Rare Books collection. Seeing families and children admire these incredible works of art, knowing that they might never have been discovered without Bruno's voice in my head telling me to keep looking, gives me a satisfaction that money can't buy. But I kept enough pieces to change my life completely. The remaining collection, sold through Sotheby's over a period of 6 months, brought in $42 million after taxes and legal fees, more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. But more importantly, it represented the vindication of every risk I'd taken and every person who'd told me I was crazy for following my instincts. The first thing I did was call Finn. "Remember when you asked me to be practical about the business?" I said when he picked up the phone. "Please tell me you're not about to do something else completely insane," he replied, but I could hear him, smiling. "I want to offer you a job as operations manager of Chen Marine Heritage Group. Starting salary is twice what you're making in tech, plus profit sharing." The silence lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, "Z, are you serious?" "Dead serious. We're going to be the premier maritime restoration facility on the West Coast, and I need someone I trust to help me run it." Delora's reaction was even better. After spending 2 years trying to convince me to abandon the marine industry, she now brags to her real estate clients about her daughter's maritime treasure hunting empire. She's become our unofficial business development coordinator, connecting us with wealthy yacht owners who need restoration work. But the most meaningful transformation happened with the business itself. Bruno's tiny repair shop has become a 15,000 square foot facility with separate restoration bays for different types of vessels. We specialize in bringing dead boats back to life, from classic wooden sailboats to military patrol craft to luxury yachts that people thought were beyond saving. The best part is that our success story made national news, and now we regularly receive calls from boat owners with mysterious vessel histories. Last month, we started restoration work on a 1960s Coast Guard cutter that the owner swears has sealed compartments somewhere in the hull. 3 weeks ago, I got a call about a sunken yacht in the San Juan Islands where the insurance company suspects valuable cargo might still be aboard. Ren, who stuck with me through the entire terrifying and exhilarating process, is now our lead marine archaeologist. She earned her certification through the University of Washington's Maritime program, using her experience with the Blackwood collection as her thesis project. "So what's next, treasure hunter?" Finn asked me last week as we stood on the dock, watching our team carefully lift a restored 1920s runabout into the water for its first voyage in 50 years. I smiled, thinking about the 3 mysterious vessel projects we have scheduled for next month. Actually, I got a call about a yacht that ran aground near the Oregon coast in 1987. The owner swears there's something valuable still inside, but nobody's been able to reach it because of the dangerous currents. Ren, who was standing nearby, reviewing dive equipment, looked up and grinned. "Here we go again. But this time, I'm bringing underwater cameras and a full safety crew." Every evening I walk through the shop after everyone else has gone home, running my hands along Bruno's original workbench and breathing in the familiar smell of motor oil and salt air. The compass he left me sits in a place of honor on my desk, and sometimes I swear I can still hear his voice reminding me that the biggest discoveries come from looking where other people are afraid to search. The SS Meridian still sits in Seattle Harbor, but now she's being converted into a floating museum dedicated to maritime history and the art of taking calculated risks. Sometimes the most important treasures aren't gold or artwork. They're the courage to trust your instincts even when everyone thinks you're crazy. Bruno was right all along. The ocean really does keep secrets, and some of those secrets are worth more than gold.